Today on the All About Fitness podcast, this is going to be a fun discussion with Dr. Sylvia Tara. I messed that up. We'll go with it with Dr. Sylvia Tara, the PhD and the author of The Secret Life of Fat. How are you doing today, Dr. Tara?
I'm doing terrific. Thanks. How are you?
I am doing well. And I love the title of this book, The Secret Life of Fat. If you could, and I know we're going to go down a number of different roads today, give us a quick overview of how you got interested in this subject, because I really think you do a great job of breaking down some of the misconceptions about the main it's a three-letter word, but many of us treat it like a four-letter word, but it's a main three-letter word that most of us just don't know that much about. How'd you get started going down this process or going down this road?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually I gain weight very, very easily, and I have a very hard time losing weight. And I have just about my whole life. I've watched people be able to eat whatever they want to eat, barely exercise, and stay thinner, more fit than I was, even though I was counting every calorie. And so I went on a number of different diets, and some diets I could actually gain weight rather than lose, or some of them would take a really long time before I would lose weight. And I just got really fed up. I was about to go on one more diet, one of the more popular diets out there now. And I thought, before I do this, I really need to understand fat, and I need to understand my fat because it's behaving differently. And so I'm a scientist by training. I'm a biochemist. And I thought, if anyone can understand fat, I can. So I'm going to do a lot of research. And I spent 5 years researching everything about fat. I pulled out 1,000 publications, read through them all. I called over 50 scientists around the world about their research on fat. And what I found out was so surprising, so astounding. I thought, I have to write this all in a book. And so The Secret Life of Fat is that book. It's about all the surprising, really shocking things I found out about our fat and why some people have a much harder time losing fat than others.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask that question first before I got into your background, into your academic background, because I found that very fascinating that you have two very, very high end degrees. I mean, you mentioned your PhD in biochemistry, but you're also an MBA from Wharton, which is that's a pretty mean feat. I mean, Wharton is one of the better MBA programs in the country. How did that happen? How do you go from MBA to biochemistry? Not that they're completely dissimilar, but what led you down that journey, and would you consider if somebody were to ask you, are you a business person or are you a scientist? How do you describe what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I love science, right? I think I'm a scientist at heart, probably first and foremost. But the other part of what I like is being able to apply science in a macro environment, right? In a macro kind of setting where it's applying to everybody and you can communicate it and you're doing something really high impact with that science. So I think when I was doing my research, I was actually researching Alzheimer's disease, and I was researching acetylcholinesterase, right? Its implication. I knew every single amino acid on that protein. I could tell you what all the side chains were. It was crazy the amount of information I had on one protein. And I got to a point where, I want to do something bigger. I want to do more than looking at one protein. I want to understand health and biochemistry and how it applies on a large scale and mass to people. So I think going into business from there seemed natural to me. Getting my MBA certainly helped. It's what do you do with this knowledge? How do you make it appropriate and applicable to wide swaths of people instead of just focusing on mice and one protein and what that means? Not that there's great value in doing that. I just like to apply what I know in a much wider setting.
That makes all the sense in the world. And Doc, as I was looking at this, I've been running. I don't keep an actual score, but I think I'm gonna have to go back and look because you're like the fourth or fifth doctor or PhD from UCSD, from University of California, San Diego. So I think I'm running neck and neck between Stanford and UCSD for interview subjects. And how do you go? How number one, how'd you end up at San Diego? Why'd you pick that PhD program?
They have a very good neuroscience program and biochemistry program. So I was in California, so I think I looked at a number of different programs. I got accepted to quite a few, but they had a really good program. I was a marquee fellow there, and what that helped me do was I could pick any research topic. I wasn't limited to a certain department because I had a scholarship and funding for it. So I could really kind of blend a number of different disciplines together. So I put together pretty much neuroscience and biochemistry. And at the time, I wasn't really studying fat. I mean, I had a natural interest in it just because I always had to control my weight. But I was really into behavior and neuroscience and the biochemistry behind why we do what we do, basically.
Well, and I have to be 100% honest. As I was kind of reading through this, I don't know if you remember the old Seinfeld episode where they're eating low fat, and I'm gonna use that for listeners. I'm gonna use that in air quotes. They're eating low fat frozen yogurt, and Jerry's like, "Why do I keep gaining weight? This is low fat." Um, but I thought that occurred to me. But how is our perception over time? Because I thought you provided a pretty good snapshot of this. Over time, how is our perception, society, and culture? How our perception, our thoughts, our views towards fat? How has that shifted? How has that adjusted?
Yeah, what a great question. I have a whole chapter on the history of how we view fat, right? It has changed tremendously and radically throughout the last centuries. I mean, believe it or not, there was a time after the Civil War, right? After the 1860s, people loved fat. It was precious, right? It was heralded. There was a place called the Fat Men's Club where you had to be fat enough to join this really prestigious club. Heavier celebrities were really celebrated, right? It didn't start being that we like thin until around the turn of the century, early 1900s. And when food was scarce, right, fat was really prized. People wanted it. It was glamorized. And then as the economy got better after the Civil War, people had more food. Factories started coming into place, so there was more sedentary kind of behavior. People started gaining weight. And it was around that time that business leaders, political leaders, right, academic leaders were saying, well, we have to be careful now about fat. And that's when the dieting industry really began, right? When people started getting nervous about, whoa, I didn't know I had fat. I thought fat was good. I guess I have to lose it now. But a lot of hucksters and crazy diets came out. I mean, there was a tapeworm diet where people would swallow tapeworms to get rid of their fat. There was a smoking diet. You know, Lucky Cigarettes had a campaign around take a Lucky instead of a sweet. Crazy things, crazy diets, soap, fat off soap. You're supposed to be able to melt away your soap. So all these hucksters and entrepreneurs came into it trying to sell their wares around fat because suddenly everyone was so worried about it. And I think that was probably the advent of just kind of mass hysteria around fat. But really, if you look at fats, you know, what I learned about fat is it's a critical endocrine organ. People think of it as just ugly blubber, right? This excess storage of calories that you have to get rid of at all costs. And no fat is the best fat. You know, 5% body fat's a great thing to have. It's not actually true, right? Your fat is critical to your body. It's releasing hormones that your body depends on that it doesn't really have other sources of. It affects your brain, your thinking, it affects your brain size. Our brain size and mass is linked to our fat level. Our bone strength is linked to our fat level. Even our immune system, right, is linked to our fat level. How we think, you know, our obsession with food or how focused we get on food is linked to our having a healthy fat level, even wound healing, right? So what I found out about what fat is actually doing was really eye-opening. And I think once you read more about it, you start to appreciate your fat. You start to realize what it's actually trying to do for you, and that you have to take care of it like any organ, like the way you take care of your lungs or your heart, right? Or your digestive tract. Your fat is actually just as important, and having the right amount of it and keeping it healthy is really critical.
Well, and that's exactly where I wanted to go with that. What I want to do is kind of set the stage of what our view was historically on fat, and then go right into the conversation about fat as an organ, because I really think that people out there don't understand that. They look at it as, and I've explained it this way for years, and my thinking has evolved, but we look at it as energy storage. When I was working with personal training clients full time, I would always point out, hey, if you have extra fat on your body, that's just all you're doing is carrying around extra energy. And the analogy I'd always make, doctor, is would you feel safe driving around with 20 gallons of gasoline in your trunk? You know, if you carry it safely, yeah, but it's probably not the safest thing to do. And so the point that I would make to them of that is that all you have with fat is extra energy that could be impacting your body. But if we shift that mindset and we start looking at fat as an organ, and you touched on it just there, fat as an endocrine organ. Number one, what is the endocrine system? And then number two, what kind of chemicals or what kind of hormones does fat produce that are critical to our function?
Yeah, so it's good. So our endocrine system is really all of our glands that produce hormones that we need, right? So the pituitary gland, you know, and growth hormone, our adrenal gland and adrenaline, right? Our ovaries or testes with estrogen and testosterone, all the hormones our body needs are what the endocrine system is. Our fat actually also produces hormones, surprisingly, produces two really critical hormones. One is leptin and another is adiponectin. And to talk about leptin first, leptin is primarily produced by our fat, and it actually controls our brain, right? So our leptin gets released from fat, travels through our bloodstream, and goes to our hypothalamus. And when it's there, it controls appetite, right? So when you start to lose some fat, your body reacts because now there's less leptin than it's used to. And it
Mm.
starts to go into a little bit of overdrive, and it drives your appetite to want to eat more. It gets worried. You're losing fat, you're losing a critical organ. And actually, scientifically shown that people who've lost 10% of their body weight or more, they're much more obsessive about food, right? When they do fMRI scans on their brains, when they look at pictures of food, their excitatory parts of their brain light up really wildly, right? Their inhibitory parts of their brain actually are diminished. So they're more excited by food with less ability to control themselves around food. So they're really driven to put fat back on. The other thing leptin does when we start losing weight and we have some depletion of leptin is it actually controls our metabolism as well. So our skeletal muscle is 25% more efficient when we start losing weight. Your body finds ways to reduce the calorie burning, right? So it's trying to it's noticing something's wrong. We're losing some fat. We have less leptin. Okay, let's conserve how we burn calories and let's drive this person to eat because we're really nervous we're losing fat. And this effect, it has long-term consequences. One is when you do lose weight, right, say 10% or more, you need fewer calories than before, right? Because of what I just said. You're much more efficient now with how you use your calories, and your appetite is bigger. So someone say who was at 170 pounds and lost 20 pounds to get to 150, compared to someone who's 150 to begin with, naturally, without dieting, the person who lost those 20 pounds will need 22% fewer calories going forward.
Mm.
And this effect lasts for a while. So it's almost 400 calories less a day for an average person. It's been studied for up to 6 years, and it's uncertain whether this effect ever really goes away. For me, this was one of the biggest learnings because I always kind of thought that, you go on a diet, you lose your weight, then you can go back to, to eating okay or eating a little bit more. And of course you get weight regained, and it was very frustrating. And then it feels like, well, maybe I went on the wrong diet, or maybe I'm just doing this wrong, or maybe I'm just bad at this. But after learning this, some people find it depressing. For me, it was incredibly empowering. I eat less than someone else who's at my weight, right? Who didn't have to diet. And I have to do this pretty much forever. But this is how I know how to stay at the weight I want to stay at now, right? And before that, I wouldn't have understood. It always feels like you're on the wrong diet. Just go on paleo, just go on Atkins, just try something else. You're doing something wrong. None of that's true. There's no one diet that fits all. You got to find one that fits you and your lifestyle. And you have to understand your fat in order to be able to control it.
And that's really, I think that's an important message because that is the one thing. And when I have other experts on here about metabolism, about nutrition, I just want to point out, doctor, it's a very consistent message that everything, whether it's strength training, whether it's bodybuilding, whatever it is you can look at a study, and even if it's a huge population, a huge N size, you can look at the study. The fact is, every single one of us are individual. We're variable, and what you and I can follow the same program, the same diet, calorie per calorie, or intake per intake, and we're going to get different results just because our physiology is different. Now, you mentioned another hormone. You talked about, I think you did a great job of breaking down leptin, but it was adiponectin, and I'm totally pronouncing that wrong, I know, but that second hormone that the fat produces.
Yeah, and you pronounced it right,
Okay.
adiponectin. This is also really fascinating. So your fat also releases adiponectin, and adiponectin has a function of telling fat where to go. And so when you have dietary fat, right, circulating in your bloodstream, triglycerides, adiponectin guides your fats in your blood to the right place on your body, right? And so you would tell it to go to your hips, to your arms. It will send it away from your visceral area. And before I go into adiponectin, let me talk a little bit about the different types of fat we have. So there's visceral fat, which I'm sure you and your audience knows, is that fat under your stomach wall, right? There's regular white fat, which is a fat underneath your skin. So underneath, your in your thigh area, in your buttocks, even in your stomach, but not under your stomach wall. And then there's brown fat, right? Brown fat actually burns calories and produces heat. And then there's beige fat, which can turn brown upon exercise and cold exposure. And so visceral fat, of course, is the bad type of fat that we don't want. Now, exercise actually induces fat to release adiponectin. And so when we exercise, what you're also telling the fat in your bloodstream to do is come to the right areas. It will direct it to the proper areas, your arms, your buttock, your legs, and keep it away from your visceral area. I tell this fascinating story about sumo wrestlers in the book. So sumo wrestlers, of course, they're obese, right? They weigh 400 pounds. They eat about 6,000 calories a day, but they also exercise for 6 to 7 hours a day. And so sumo wrestlers are not metabolically unhealthy. They're actually healthy, which is very, crazy when you think about how heavy they are. But because they're exercising so much, they're producing adequate, strong levels of adiponectin.
Mm.
And that hormone from your fat is directing fat to the right places. So they're healthy. And once they retire and they no longer do that amount of exercise, they become metabolically unhealthy very quickly. They start to get heart disease and diabetes and all these things. Right. So there's a question of, can you be fit but fat? The answer is actually yes. I think it's best never to be significantly overweight. It does have pressure on your bones and your knees and other, other problems associated with it. But if you're going to be heavy, then it's best to keep that fat away from your visceral area. And one way you can do that is to do some exercise, heavy exercise, at least an hour and a half a day.
So that was a great breakdown of it. And my question based on that though is, so if we look at that, when we're exercising, say we're doing a whole body exercise, and what immediately came to my mind were those heavy ropes, those battling ropes. Are you familiar with those where people move the ropes up and down?
Yeah.
So what the research has shown, I just want to clarify this. So you're suggesting that what the research has shown, that if I do a lot of upper body work as I eat food, as I digest fat, and just for listeners, fat is energy. That's one of our primary sources of energy in our body. But as I eat the food, if I'm doing a lot of upper body work, like with heavy ropes or boxing or other movements that incorporate my upper body, you're saying that the fat will be, as I'm digesting it, will be moved to those muscles to provide energy. Did I hear that right?
So not completely. So what's
Okay,
going to
that's a little
happen?
simplistic, but I just want to kind of get that thought
Yeah,
process.
sure. So you don't have to exercise while you eat or anything like
I
that,
thought.
right? So I just want to be clear. So it's not necessarily going to give it to your muscles to use as energy. What adiponectin does is it just redirects that fat to healthy fat deposits. So there's
Okay.
unhealthy fat deposits like your visceral area, a very unhealthy place to have fat. That is correlated with heart disease and diabetes, all kinds of issues. What adiponectin does, and it circulates throughout, not just after exercise, it just you get higher levels in your body, and doesn't matter like when you eat, so you don't have to worry about the timing of exercise and eating. You just have to worry about exercising overall. And when you have higher levels of adiponectin in your bloodstream, in your body, it will direct fat in your blood, right, fat as you eat, to more healthy deposits of fat tissue. And those healthier deposits of fat tissue are in your legs, your buttocks, your arms. It's anywhere but your visceral
Mm,
area, right? So
okay.
if you're going to have like an extra 10, 20 pounds or whatever, all right, but exercise, make sure it's not in your visceral area. And adiponectin, really, fat is helping itself, is saying, fat, come home to the right place, right? Come and stay here. And it's putting it in the right place. And it's very fascinating, the whole adiponectin story. And we're really just at the beginning of understanding fat. I mean, those are two hormones that are pretty well characterized. There's a number of hormones fat is releasing. We don't know completely, right, that the full impact of what it's doing, but it's a very complex system.
Well, I appreciate the reason why I asked that question is I do think there are people out there that think I run, I cycle, I do certain types of exercise, but if they're not engaging, I try to get people, you want to engage all the muscles in your body because you can
Mhm.
be extremely fit. I can be a fit runner, but if I'm not doing anything for my arms, if I'm not do, I can do explosive running for my legs and develop the type 2 fibers and efficient glycogen metabolism in my legs. But if I'm not doing the same intensity of explosive training with my arm muscles, my shoulders, they're not going to be as metabolically efficient. I mean, that's why I asked that question is to get people thinking I need to do whole body exercise as opposed to maybe just go for a run or maybe go for a bike ride. Now, to shift a little bit and kind of circle back on something you referred to, one of the things I picked up on in The Secret Life of Fat was the connection between fat, bone, and estrogen, and there's some connection in there. Can you talk a little bit about how those different well, estrogen is a hormone, and bone could be considered. Would we consider bone organ as well? Because I know it's made up of cells, and bone is actually living. I think most people think of bone as an inert mass just because we see the skeletal structures. But the way I've learned it, bone is living tissue within our structure. So, what is the connection between bone, fat, and estrogen?
Yeah, and that's really good. And I think you're right. I think the more and more we learn about a lot of different organs, the more we're realizing they have hormones, right? They're interacting, they're talking to each other, our organs in a way. So bone is talking to fat, fat is talking to bone. So you need a sufficient level of fat, right? For one, there's the weight on your bones, so it helps develop, some of your bone mass. Also estrogen, right? Fat does release estrogen as well. This is really important for girls, right? Especially teenage girls are learning. If they have insufficient fat, their bones aren't fully developing, right? They're not getting to the full mass they need to get to. But interestingly, bone also signals back to the body by producing a hormone called osteocalcin. And through that signaling cascade, this hormone induces the pancreas to release more insulin, which ultimately increases our fat. So bone and fat kind of love each other, right? Your fat will help your bones, and then your bones will help your fat coexist together. So it's like interestingly interwoven. And so, yeah, it just shows that we need balance. And this concept or thought of, well, fat's terrible and we should reduce it at all costs. The lower body fat percentage you have, the better. Not really true. And some of it also studied in women with anorexia, because as they lose a lot of fat, right, their bones get porous, their brain mass shrinks. The importance of fat is just seen on so many different ways. And it wouldn't surprise me if more and more we find out other organs are talking to each other in our body, and that balance and ecosystem is really important.
Well, just so you know a little bit more of my background, I went deep down the fascia, rabbit hole a number of years ago, and I studied that for a number of years, and we were learning a lot more about fascia. Connective tissue as an organ, right? I mean, for years, anatomists would remove fascia and connective tissue, thinking it was an inert structure, but we're now seeing that there's metabolism, there are nerve endings, and all this stuff. So I really do think that when we look at the body, we've taken this separatist view, right? We've taken that this one part of the body does this, so let's study that. But we need to take it as a holistic and collective view. And with that comes into the idea of genetics and looking at how does our genetics, because you mentioned early on in your PhD program you're studying proteins, how does genetics really drive our body's reaction or response to fat or anything that we do?
Yeah, that's really good. And I do write about genetics in the book because I think that's an important component. Some people are more prone to weight gain, right, than others, and it does have to do with genetics. I mean, there's different gene variants that have been written about, and again, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg of discovering them, right? Where it's so nascent in the science that we know about. And really, fat research it's only been big since obesity epidemics started happening. So really, just in the last 30 years, did NIH start to fund fat research to understand why people were getting heavier. So it's a very new field of science. But the genetics, I talk about the Pima Indians for one. So if we even talk about genotypes, right? So the Pima Indians were living in Arizona, right? And they had migrated up through the Bering Strait. And they were natural hunters, gatherers, farmers, and they stayed rather thin, living, that lifestyle. And when Caucasians started coming in, eating flour, lard, bacon, all this food that they were getting, the Indians started eating the same food, especially through some subsistence programs. And they started gaining weight, they started getting obese, whereas the Caucasians around them weren't getting obese, right? So the theory is they developed this kind of thrifty genotype, right? Through millennia of fasting, kind of having famines going around. They evolved in a way that really helps them save calories. And so that's the genotype type of philosophy or theory. But there's also, we've discovered some specific variants. FTO is one that's linked to appetite. So people that have a certain variant of the FTO gene, they're driven to eat high calorie food naturally. And there's another one called ARS1. People who have a certain variant of this gene, they're more programmed to store away their fat very efficiently, right? So people who have a certain variant, they actually have more circulating fat, but they're not as heavy. And people who have, the other variant, they pull it away, they store it in their fat tissue, so they're healthier, but they're a little heavier. So and even with twins, there's twin studies where they show the correlation of abdominal fat with twins, or how fast or slow that they can gain or lose weight. So there's definitely a genetic component to fat and fat loss. What I want to say though is that it's not really an excuse, right, to be heavy. And I never want people to walk away with that as the entail here. So even though it might be harder or more challenging for you to lose fat, you can. You just have to work harder at it. You have to be more persistent. And one thing that's found is that actually exercise can overcome the effects of these gene variants. So if you have the FTO gene or the ARS1 gene, if you do exercise, even light exercise like gardening, right, riding a bike, it seems to overcome the effect of gene variants. So don't give license, right? None of the coaches or people listening to this should worry about it. I think it's harder if you have some of these gene variants, but it is still possible. And I write in my book when I diagnosed myself, because I wrote this book to understand what was going on with my body and why I gained weight so easily. I kind of deduced that I must have the thrifty genotype. My parents are Indian, Eastern Indian. There was plenty of famine in India, right, through generations. And I'm sure my body, the genes I have evolved in a way. I put on weight. It learns how to deal with scarcity. I always joke with my family, I could not eat for 4 years and I'd be the one person alive because I think my body needs 10 calories a day to exist.
Well, as you're saying that, doctor, what I do, a lot of what I do is I consult with equipment companies and I consult with other organizations to teach fitness education programs. And for the last maybe 5 to 7 years, a large percentage of my business has been traveling over to Asia. I actually have a Chinese work visa, so I'm in and out of that country on a somewhat frequent basis. And I've only been to Delhi one time, and I'll probably, once everything gets sorted out, I'll probably be going back to India with some programming over there. But one of the things that we're seeing in the fitness industry is that for the last 30 years that we have been shifting our jobs, our first world jobs over to Southeast Asia and over to Asia, whether it's factory work, whether it's computer programming work, whether it's accounting work. So what they're seeing now in countries like India, like Philippines, like Malaysia, Indonesia, is now that people have more money, and also I should say that at the same time, because your mention of the Pima Indians is what made me think of this. At the same time, you have McDonald's, KFC, Yum Brands, people buying cars, people buying screens. So you have this huge issue right now in Southeast Asia and throughout Asia of people have more money, they're working more, they're walking and moving less, and all these we're now exporting type 2 diabetes over to Asia, and we're also now exporting fitness professionals like myself to go over there and educate people how to and educate personal trainers. So it's been this interesting economic and an interesting shift. And I just want to point that out because we can see this happening in real time. Have you studied any of that in terms of what's going on in other parts of the world and how they adapt? Because you mentioned the Pima Indians, but have you looked at how different societies are kind of evolving and adapting to some of the issues they're facing with?
Yeah, I mean, Asians in particular, that you mentioned. So Asians also have a high, ability to be skinny fat, right? Where they look thin, but they're actually gaining a lot of visceral fat. And so it's deceiving because you don't feel like you're overweight. And yet there's a higher risk of heart attack, say around Indians, right? Or some other Asians. And this has been studied too. I think also Indonesians, if I'm not mistaken. So it's really important. And I think just like the Pima Indians, right? They might have been able to subsist for long periods of time on their natural foods. But as we get more processed food in there, more fast food, more sedentary life, it can have really deleterious effects on certain people, right? Certain types of people, certain genotypes, certain races. And even, here in the US, like, the way Caucasians store fat versus say African Americans store fat, it's different, right? African Americans get it more in the buttock area. There's actually Caucasians get more visceral fat. So our genetics plays a really big part and we have to really, take care of that. And just overall, I think a learning for everyone is you really should stay away from processed food and really refined foods, right? It's even though some people can get away with it, it's actually good for nobody. So if there's anything to take away very quickly and easily that you can do, stay with leafy greens, salads, right? Fresh meat that you make yourself. We don't really even know what's in our food anymore. I've taken to cooking almost constantly because even meat, right? I don't know if I'm eating chicken nugget kind of meat that has gels and fillers in it, or am I actually eating meat? And so, shop for good food. It's very little effort to cook. And there's a lot of different books out there. You could just bake meat with salt and pepper on it and it actually tastes just fine. And it's also by far more satisfying, right? If you leave the fiber in place and you leave the whole proteins in place, compared to getting fast food, which is a lot of filler and carbs, and you're hungry again in 2 hours and want more. The natural foods, I think, will work for all those genotypes and helping to reduce the amounts of fat.
Well, as I was reading this and as you're talking just now, I'm thinking about, and I'm in no means I do not try to present myself as an expert on nutrition, but I remember there's a lecture I heard years ago where the individual was talking about you can have 100 calories of blueberries and you can have 100 calories of M&Ms. They're both 100 calories. They're both about the same, going to provide the same amount of energy, and that's all a kilocalorie is a unit of energy. But what's different about the M&Ms is it's sugar. It's going to have a different reaction. So really, I just want to kind of make this point clear and maybe have you talk about this a little bit, because when we look at how the human body responds to the food we eat, it really comes down to the hormones and the intake. If you eat a cleaner quality diet, that's my understanding, is you have a much different hormone response than if you're eating stuff that's been treated with sugar, vegetable oils, whatever, and all this extra sodium. That it's much more. It's not so much the calories themselves, but it's much more of the impact they have on the endocrine system and the metabolism. Is that kind of a right way of thinking of it?
That's a very good observation. So depending on how much insulin we provoke, right? And then certain foods will provoke a lot more insulin and put all of your calories away in fat tissue right away. I mean, in a way it's healthy, right? Because it's getting out of your circulating bloodstream and it's going into fat tissue where it belongs, hopefully into the right types of fat deposits, right? In your arms and legs. But the other thing besides hormones is our microbiome is something to consider as well, right? So depending on the composition of your microbiome in your gut, you could be getting more or less calories out of the same food. So like a cup of Cheerios
Mm.
might be 120 calories or it might be 80 calories, depending on your microbiome. And so the more fats and sugars and carbs we eat, we tilt towards a microbiome that's extremely efficient at pulling calories out of food. And you're actually getting more calories. So in a way, fat is begetting fat. You're eating fattening foods, right? The high carbs and things that make you fat. And your microbiome is growing in a way that's actually extracting a lot of calories out of it. Now, if you eat a lot of fruits, a wide diversity of fruits and vegetables, leafy greens, right? Some of these prebiotics, you're tilting towards a different microbiome that's less efficient, if you will. You're passing more as waste. And so again, weight loss begets weight loss. You're eating healthier foods that are lower calories and you're training your microbiome to not tilt towards the distribution that extracts a ton of calories out of food. So I think that that's also another part to think about is how are we training our gut to interact with our food and then our hormone levels as well, right? And insulin resistance is another side story off of insulin reaction, right? The more you have insulin because you're eating a lot of M&Ms versus blueberries, your body's not even responding to it the same way. It's almost like there's too much noise and it's going deaf. And so now you're not even putting away those calories into fat tissue. It's all those things are just circulating in your blood. So it all matters a lot. And it's not easy to stop eating M&Ms, right? I'll give that to somebody, especially if you're used to sugar in your day. I mean, there's a little bit of a high you get off, taking a bolus of sugar, I'm sure. But I think through time and through training and through some behavioral techniques, modifications we can make, it's a worthwhile trade-off. And you can find happiness in that high in other ways. And that's something I've written about in my book as well. And also in the course I'm just putting out now. That the mind over fat, right? Where else can you get that high, right? You can spend money to get that high. You can shop, you can watch a trash movie or a juicy audio novel, right? Find some other like guilty pleasure besides those M&Ms. And it's a kind of weird temptation bundle, if you will. Bundle one thing you have to do with something you like to do to get you through that time.
Well, it comes back to that chemical reaction in the body, right? I mean, we're searching dopamine and serotonin and adenine. We're searching those neurotransmitters which make us feel good, and we could either get that from jumping out of an airplane or get that from eating, a triple fudge sundae or eating. I mean, just the body. Again, I just want to make the point for listeners is that a lot of it just comes back to our chemical reaction, to how our body reacts to certain stimuli and creates sort of a chemical homeostasis in the body. Now, to kind of shift gears a little bit and sort of talk about some of the solutions, well, to stay with this, we're moving towards the solutions. But what I want to do is ask a question about what are some of the myths about weight loss and fat loss? Because I know for years we've been sold, eat low fat food. Well, no, now we don't want to do that. Now we want to eat high fat, low carbohydrate. Now we don't want to, we have all these myths. But what are some of the myths regarding fat and weight loss?
I think the biggest myth is any idea that one diet fits all, right? So if it's low fat or high fat, it's just not going to work for everybody. And I think people like to get on to these trends almost like it's a religion. It's like you join a religion and this is the way it is. And you just have to, put up with it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's research coming out now. I think Weizmann Institute in Israel is doing quite a bit of it, where they're really showing that people respond very individually to food. I mean, there are people who can eat, a muffin or a cookie or alcohol, and they don't have any spike in their blood glucose at all. There are other people that they just take a bite of one of those things and their blood sugar spikes. And that might be a part of our dieting history, how we've dieted in the past, how our body's reacting to those things. But nonetheless, some of us can get away with a lot more eating of sugars and carbs than others. And so if you're doing fine eating that, then I don't know that there's a reason to go so extreme as something like an Atkins diet or a very low carb diet. Your body's handling carbs okay. On the other hand, if you are one of these people who has one bite of a muffin and your blood sugar spiking, obviously the very low carb diet is going to be best for you. And so I think that is the biggest myth now. We need to individualize. We have a fat blueprint, if you will, right? So how a 55-year-old woman who's had a couple kids and has 100 pounds overweight, she's going to respond very differently to a diet compared to, say, a 22-year-old male who has 10 pounds to lose, right? Their hormones are totally different. Their dieting history is different. The other factor that we haven't talked about yet is yo-yo dieting, right? Because that also affects your hormones. So we did talk about leptin up front, and once you lose some weight, how you're driven to eat and your metabolism is lower. So when you yo-yo diet, you've affected your whole hormone distribution as well, right? You are now much more efficient in how you burn calories. So all that taken into account, I think there's a fat blueprint, right? And I'm working on, I have a course now where we talk about the fat blueprint, how to diagnose your fat and how to figure out what diet's going to work for you, how much you have to ratchet it up. And if you have really stubborn fat, I think intermittent fasting is one of the best ways to bust through that. That's what I ended up doing, right, for my own plan. Is diet has to work for you psychologically, right? You have to be able to stand it. And some of these diets like paleo or very low carb, people come off it after some time, right? So they're good diets, they're biochemically sound, but there's a lot of people who can't do that much food prep or that much planning. And just like after a year or so, they come off it and they gain their weight back. So because you might have to stay on your diet forever because of the effects of leptin that we talked about, right? And that you have to have fewer calories after you lose some weight, find a diet you can stand forever, right? You could be on this diet forever and you could be okay. Yes, there will be days you come off, right? And you'll go jump back on, but 95% of your time, you're going to be on this diet. Psychologically, you can stand it. Sociologically, you can stand it. Your life supports that diet. If you're someone who has to entertain a lot at night, if you're a business person or salesperson, you have all these social dinners, I don't know that intermittent fasting is going to be great for you, right? You might be better off with a low carb diet where you can just order low carb foods. And then biochemically, of course, it has to work for you. You're actually losing weight. And like I said in the beginning, I've been on diets where I gained weight. It was just meant for somebody else's body. So I think that's the real myth, is that there's one diet, and if you fail at it, it's your fault, and that's just not true, right? There's not every diet's going to work for everyone, and I think we have to understand our fat, understand our bodies, and pick a diet that works for us psychologically, sociologically, and also biochemically.
I like the way you said that. And what I want to point out and bring up is I've been doing intermittent fasting for maybe not quite 2 years. And I'll go, there are periods where I'm really good at it and really use it and do it well. And then there are periods where I got other things happening and I find myself snacking a little bit during the day. But one of the main reasons why I went on it was talk with my physician. He was talking about regulating blood sugar. Because for years I'd heard about, read about intermittent fasting a little bit. And I thought it was another one of these trends. But also the more data we're getting on it, I'm really fascinated by it. I'm reading David Sinclair's book right now on aging. And one of the main things they talk about with controlling the aging process, what the research shows is obviously through exercise, which I think is the purpose of my podcast. But the other thing they're seeing is through caloric restriction. Is that low calorie, whether it's extremely low, I think it's between 600 and 1,000 calories a day, caloric restriction. They're studying it in the lab right now. And what they're seeing is caloric restriction really tends to prolong life. I mean, that's where I'm just pointing that out, that the more I hear, I like the way you broke down intermittent fasting, doctor, but I want people to point out that it's still such a new area. We're not 100% sure what it does within the body, but what we're seeing, or what the scientists are seeing, is some pretty significant results. Now, the question where I'm going to with that is, can we do genetic testing? You talk about our genome, you talk about the gut, and I'm going to grab something real quick. I have this kit right here. This is from, I had somebody from this, I had one of the Stanford PhDs from Biome, and Biome tests the gut microbiome. Is there testing out there? You talk about your course and you mentioned it in The Secret Life of Fat, but if somebody really wants to understand a little bit more about how their body responds, is there any type of specific testing that you've seen that might be that somebody could access on the consumer market that could help them understand a little bit more about their personal genetics and their reactions so they can start trying to dial in on the diet that works best for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't seen an exact assessment, either through AI or like, lab tests specifically. I know there are some research institutes that are trying to be more holistic. They're looking at the microbiome through fecal matter. They're looking at blood tests. They're looking at responses. But I think it's more in the lab from what I've seen so far anyway. I think if people really want to diagnose for themselves, I mean, one for genetics, I don't know if some of the genes I've mentioned have made their way to 23andMe yet or not. I'd have to double check, but I'm not sure because again, some of this is quite new. And unless it becomes really standard, it doesn't usually make its way onto the consumer tests at least. But I mean, you can almost like tell looking at your family line, if your fat distribution looks like your parents, if your family, right, the lineage has had trouble with weight, not just because they're eating a ton, but even when they're eating moderately, it seems like they gain. You can almost assume that there might be a genetic component for you, right? And all it means is that you have to try harder, right? And you can almost figure this out without even knowing the past and knowing what's in your microbiome. I know when I had to figure out my body, it was an evolving, almost an AI type of process. I logged everything I ate, and I weighed myself every day. I logged what I ate, the time I ate, the caloric, content of that food, and then if I had any drugs that day, if I had aspirin for my head or anything like that, anything that might affect my weight gain. And I started to see what was making me lose and what was making me stagnate. Right. And that's when I noticed that, hey, if I eat after 3 o'clock, I don't lose anything. I don't lose any weight. And there's something about that open period. Actually, there's a lot of things about that open period, again, having to do with hormones like glucagon and leptin, right, and growth hormone that prolong the overnight fast that busts through really good stubborn fat. So you can also do it even if you don't find the exact right test to take, right? If you take a log of yourself and what's working and what you're eating and is it correlating to weight loss or not, you'll start to see what things you can get away with, what food you can eat to not have a problem. I learned I can get away with straight sugar. If I really need something like a few gummy bears, it's okay. But I can't get away with a cookie. Whenever that sugar is mixed with flour, I'm dead. I've gained half a pound the next day, right? So you can start to deduce what it is you can do, right? What it is your body can get away with, the way you can eat, or how little you have to eat in order for it to start working. And I'm sure this is going to be a program at some point. Someone's going to put together, this kind of artificial intelligence way, of figuring out our body. But for now, I think you're a little bit. I'm sorry to say it, but I think you almost have to piece together that story yourself, right?
Well, this is so consistent, doctor, though, with other guests I've had on. I had on Dr. Schoenfeld, who researches muscle hypertrophy, and he's like, the only way you really know what works for you is by keeping notes, keeping track of it. Dr. McGill talks about the spine, and really each one of us moves slightly differently, and we need to be able to identify what our movement patterns are to move better. So really, I love the fact that you're highlighting this individual specificity because I can't do the same diet that you're going to do, and you can't do the same diet I'm going to do. Now, one of the things, and we'll start wrapping it up here, one of the hormones you talk about a little bit, and we haven't covered yet, is ghrelin in terms of what that does. Because my understanding is leptin is kind of on one side of the equation and ghrelin's on the other side. And one of the things that we might not do for people that might tend to overeat is they might not be able to, maybe they're not as effective at ghrelin. So can you talk a little bit about what ghrelin is and what role that plays?
Yeah, sure. So ghrelin is a hormone that gets released from your stomach, and it's associated with hunger. It's actually really important. It is particularly important for women. So I have a whole chapter, both in the book and the course, where I write about the difference between men and women. And I was really driven to do this because my husband can eat like a horse, honestly, and he fits into the same college jeans, from way back when. He has no issue with this. I can't understand it, and I don't think there's a woman in the world who hasn't complained about this, right? That men can eat so much more. So ghrelin, when women exercise, right? So when they do a good amount of exercise, they actually release a lot more ghrelin, like 33% more
Hmm.
than men. And that drives them to eat more afterward. And in my chapter, I talk about just the importance of fat for women. They're actually girl babies are born with more fat than boy babies. So even before, right, diet starts to become a real component, women have more fat. And so because of that, and because the response to ghrelin, right, I think overall for women in particular, but for both sexes, you have to be very careful how you provoke ghrelin, right? Because if you're exercising a lot and you're producing that hunger reaction,
it's very easy to overcompensate and undo all of your different, the effort that you've made so far. And I think a lot of diet books that I've seen more and more so, they're saying, be careful how you introduce exercise when you start dieting. It might be best to just do nothing but diet for a couple of weeks, get into a new way of eating, right? Get used to that reduced calorie or a different calorie intake, build your habits first. And then when you start exercising, add it slowly, right? So go for walks at first, go for longer walks, faster walks. And when you start to feel that strong hunger that's making you want to overcompensate, ratchet back a little bit. And there's different tricks too. I mean, one is high intensity interval training, right? That I do this now. So it's shorter amounts of exercise, but it's really intense. And I have found this as a great fat busting thing to do. And in order to not provoke a hunger response, I actually do it at night. So even though I'm fasting, right? Because I fast at night, I don't eat much after 3 or 4. At about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I'll do a HIIT exercise. And it's not that bad, actually. I can get through it. But afterward, yeah, I'm really hungry, but then I just go to bed, right? I just force myself to sleep. And in the morning, I don't feel any of it. I don't feel the hunger. I don't feel anything. So also, when you sleep, you kind of reset everything, right? So the better sleep we get, our leptin levels stay pretty high, which means we're overall a little bit more satiated. So although it might be hard to get through the night, I have all these cravings and I dream about food at night, but in the morning, I feel fine. So that intermittent fast, it's just good for so many things. One is that, when you start fasting, at nighttime, our growth hormone levels are at their highest, right? And so when you eat, you actually mitigate those levels a little bit of growth hormone, and it's not as effective. So if you can prolong that fasting time, if you stop eating after, it doesn't have to be as early as I do, you could stop after 5 or 6, don't eat again until 10, you've now prolonged that window by which growth hormone can be effective. Right, so you're busting through fat. Growth hormone is a great fat buster, and it's a great way to lose weight. You're also, inducing glucagon from your pancreas, and that's going to bust some fat. You're also increasing your levels of leptin, right? So you're going to be more satiated overall. So that, overnight fast is really good. Adding exercise slowly to try to reduce, the effect of ghrelin and that big hunger reaction is also important. And the little trick I learned is just to exercise at night and go to sleep if you can. I know for some people it keeps them awake. I'm okay if I exercise at night.
Yeah, some people get that extra cortisol surge or the epinephrine surge, and they have a hard time. But I love how the fact, I mean, you're hitting on key themes, and these are. I had a professor of biology from Stanford who talked about the benefits of sleep and talked about the need for sleep. I've spoken with Marty Kabbalah and Dr. Kravitz a couple times about high intensity interval training, and I just wrote a book called Ageless Intensity on how high intensity interval training helps slow down the aging process. Part of it, exactly what you mentioned, goes right into the growth hormone response. And the one thing I've seen, and this is anecdotally, the one thing I've seen in the health clubs is I'm 48 years old. I'm not going to ask you your age. I'm 48 years old. And what I've seen is a lot of women in my demographic, when they start doing strength training and when they start doing HIIT instead of 45 to 60 minutes of cardio, they're getting the bodies they want. And a large part of that is my hypothesis is resetting and promoting growth hormone, which helps metabolize fat, skin look younger, and there are a number of different benefits. So I just want to, what I'm trying to do is kind of tie in a lot of these similarities and a lot of these similar themes. And when I book guests like yourself, I love trying to connect the dots so that people can go, oh, okay, it all kind of comes. It allows listeners to put a picture together of how they can target in on their individuality. Now, to start wrapping it up, the final question I want to ask is, well, there's one other question, but I'll save that towards the end. But the final question I want to ask is, what are your strategies? You've talked a lot about individualism. You've talked about taking notes. But what can somebody learn from The Secret Life of Fat? And what are some of your strategies that could help somebody be more productive on their weight loss journey if that is their ultimate goal?
Yeah, that's really good. There's so many directions. I write about so many things. I think one thing to start with, and I'm probably going to do more work on this in the future, is kind of your mind over fat, right? Be in the right mindset to want to get to the right weight set, right? You have to want something to go through all of this and have it. So pick a time in your life, right, where you want to do this. Don't pick a time if you're going through a divorce or you have something really stressful going on, a job change or something like that. It's not a great time. Actually getting on the right path psychologically and building new habits and maintaining them takes a lot of energy and focus, right? So pick the right time. Make sure you really want this and you're willing to do the work for it. That's a great start. Once you want something, amazingly, things will start to happen. You'll start to make changes. You'll start to seek new information, right? But the want is the start of everything. And I have a whole a chapter on this in the course and book about, mind over fat. What makes successful dieters work? What was it in their lives that got them to want this? And what was it that gets them to stay on this path? And it's actually the most important thing. The second thing is, like I said, pick a diet that really works for you. So I'm not a really obedient person, I have to say. So these diets that have 100 rules about what you can and can't eat and how your food has to be prepared, I'm just not going to do it. I like intermittent fasting because it allows me to eat what I want to during certain parts of the day. So I don't have to be as disciplined about what I'm eating. I just have to not eat all day, right? So for me, my mindset, my behavioral, that's the one that works. Again, it works, psychologically, it works biochemically. I actually lose weight off of it. So I think you really have to think about a number of things for you. There's a lot of siren songs out there. There's a lot of people trying to sell their diet to you, right? And it can be quite different. And they'll make you feel like you're failing if this isn't succeeding, because look at all my followers, look at all the people who are winning on this, right? This should be working for you. And if it's not, it's your fault. Get out of that. Get out of that. Not every diet's right. Pick one you like that you can stay on. Pick one that you could do for the long haul. It's working. When you weigh yourself every week, you see weight going. You're happy on this diet, and I think that's really important. Self-forgiveness is another thing I write about more in the book as well. There's something called dichotomous thinking. So when people fail on a diet, right? They go, I need ice cream. They come off the track. They have such guilt and they feel like it's not worth it. I'm a failure. I can't do this. They throw in the towel. And this is a behavior seen in women by far more than men, right? And it's very dangerous. It can lead to depression, eating disorders, all kinds of problems. I interviewed a number of weight loss coaches, medical weight loss coaches for my book as well. One of the biggest benefits they give to their patients is coaching them back on the diet when they go off, right? There's a real tendency to just want to stay off. I failed, I can't do this, right? So they got us thinking if you don't get an A in your class, you got a B, it might as well be an F. There's no point in going on, right? It's that slippery slope kind of thinking. And women have it more. And so learning to forgive yourself, right? Yeah, I had a beer or I had ice cream and I'm coming back on the diet tomorrow, and just keep going. Everyone's going to come off. In fact, you should come off once in a while. There's actually research I've uncovered too, that people, when they give themselves break from a task, right, after doing it day after day, they actually do better at the task when they come back. So learn that behavior of coming right back onto your diet after you do come off, and then you'll be able to stay on it for years, right? Don't think that you have to be perfect. And what I always say, to people is, don't let the perfect get in the way of the possible, right? You don't have to be perfect every minute of your diet. You don't really have to have glistening six-pack abs to be healthy, right? You have to get to a healthy weight in a way that's comfortable for you, right? Even if it's not the picture perfect, thing that would work on a reality show and impress everybody. It just has to work for you.
Well, one thing I want to say about that, doctor. Number one, I'm going to give you a big hug, a big virtual hug. But I used to do this with personal training clients quite often. They would come in, they would say, I fell off the, I did this and that. And I would always say, that was yesterday. Today is today. We can start over today. We can't control what we did or did not do yesterday. So you can't control, all you can do is do better today. And I would sometimes jokingly, and I'm not doing this and I don't mean it as a joke as religion, but I'd make the sign of the cross and give them absolution and say, okay, forget about what we did or didn't do yesterday. We're here today. Let's focus on what we can do today, and we'll worry about tomorrow when we get to tomorrow. Because I really think people need to take that mindset, because I know how it triggers. I know people say, oh, I failed and I can't do it, and they just go down this hole, and they really, they get fed up with it. And I think that can be a big challenge for people, is they let themselves beat up, and they really kind of kick their own butts. And I think what you just said is so critically important, of giving people, of taking it easy on ourselves, right? And realize that this is a journey. And the other thing that I like is purposely for years, I never really, my goal personally as a fitness educator, as someone who travels around the world, I don't care about six-pack abs. The whole point of this podcast and what I write about is how to use exercise to enhance your quality of life. Because in my mind, doctor, fitness is freedom. If we're fit, we have the freedom to get out and do what we want. If we're a few pounds overweight, it doesn't really matter as long as we're healthy and we're active every day. And have you seen those studies? I've looked at the large scale longitudinal studies, when they see that some people that are underweight have shorter mortality, they have shorter lifespans than people that might have. I mean, am I right in that? Have you seen some of those same?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, some of it's really debated, but I have a whole chapter on or a section on the obesity paradox. That's what they call it, right? Where there's some people when they're heavier, actually even heart disease and getting through like, surgeries, they actually do better. So again, our fat is important. The science of fat and what it's doing is important to understand. And once you understand your fat, you'll appreciate it. It's actually trying to help you, right? It is stabilizing your body. It is releasing hormones. When you do eat too much, it's trying to catch the fallout and store it, right? So in a way, it's helping your body maintain a homeostasis, if you will. And so, yeah, it's really important. And getting back to when you talk about people going off their diet and coming back, there's actually some research. So it's like if you give yourself a break, you do better for the long haul. Like one of the research I write about is people who have to have a hand, one of those hand grippers, and they have to hold it for a really long time. If they took a break and did something fun, like watching a pleasant movie, they actually could get back on and hold it longer. Whereas if people watch something depressing or serious, they would just give up. Same with puzzles. They showed this for people at puzzles. One group they gave radishes to eat. You probably know some of these studies. The other group they gave cookies to eat. And the people who had cookies could stay on this puzzle for really long. They were really motivated. But if you feel like you're always punishing yourself, that's when you're going to get really wary and not have the long drive for your diet. So like I said, pick a guilty pleasure. It doesn't have to be eating. And that's maybe something coaches can do as well. So instead of going off track having an ice cream because you're just so frustrated and you want to live your life, hey, go shopping, go watch some movie you think is trashy, whatever it takes, right? Get some pleasure in your life, because otherwise you won't last for the long haul. And it's almost healthy to go off your diet every once in a while, because otherwise you feel like there's no replenishment, right? I live this kind of punished life and I never get to have joy. Find that joy. And maybe it's a little bit of food once in a while that you really want, or maybe it's something else you can find that gives you a lot of pleasure.
Well, I think that's key. Or you remind yourself that, wow, this isn't that healthy, that you feel better. Because I think there's a hangover after a really, if you go out and eat greasy food or eat fried food the next day, it really is not a pleasant feeling if your body hasn't had it for a while. Now, this is the final question, and I'll let you give some contact information about how people can stay up. You did your PhD at UC San Diego. You did your MBA at Wharton. So that's kind of a little East Coast, West Coast rivalry there, kind of like East Coast, West Coast. So I'm going to go back to the 90s for that. Which one was a harder program for you? Was it harder to do your PhD, or was it harder to complete your MBA?
PhD was harder because you need original research, right? And it has to work and it has to be significant enough that they deem it is worth giving you a PhD. So there is no guarantee in getting a PhD. And so I'd say that was harder. The MBA was quite fun, to be honest with you. Yes, it was hard. We had hard classes. We had excellent professors. But like the networking you get out of an MBA and the people you meet was really fantastic.
So West Coast went. Okay, I just want to bring that up. I mean, we're not going to get into a rap battle or anything, but it's kind of that occurred to me as you're talking. Well, Dr. Tara, how can people find out more about the Secret Life of Fat? And you also have a course on it. What's your contact information? And how do you put information out and stay connected with people?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So you can get information on the course and the book at thesecretlifeoffat.com. And I also have an assessment on there, so people can do an assessment of their fat blueprint that you'll see there as well. You can always get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram use the @Sylvia Tara PhD, and you'll find me on any of those forums. And of course, there's email too that you'll see on that website. And so happy to connect. I answer a lot of questions on Facebook and through emails. And so yeah, happy to connect and help people through what is not an insignificant journey.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that, Doc, and I appreciate your time. And I think I'm just thinking to myself, I'm gonna have to start keeping track of what schools people are coming from, and kind of like start start ranking that. Have some fun with that. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Great being here.